Class is now in session. I am Professor Hockey, and today we're discussing Game 79 of the regular season between the San Jose Sharks and the Seattle Kraken, in which the Sharks have won 3-1, as we're now 1 week left of the regular season here for the San Jose Sharks. Just 3 more games after this one, and for a bit of a standings update, once again, I had mentioned in my previous review that the Sharks could have come into tonight having already locked down the last place spot in the league, but with Chicago having lost in regulation yesterday, and with the Sharks having won in regulation tonight, technically there still exists a world in which the Sharks finish 31st in the league. But it should once again be emphasized just how unlikely of a scenario that is. For the Sharks to actually jump up to 31st place, in their remaining 3 games, they would have to win at least 2 of them and then get an overtime loss or just another win over their last 3 games. All of that assuming that the Blackhawks lose all 4 of their remaining games as well. This is not an impossibility, but it is rather unlikely to happen. You might be saying, well, look at here at the game tonight against Seattle. The Sharks actually managed to win. Who says that they won't be able to win all of their games down the stretch? Well, if we actually take a bit of a closer look at how this game indeed went down, it wasn't exactly the recipe for success that the Sharks can repeat over this last week to get more and more wins. The Sharks having to heavily rely on their rookie goaltender Devin Cooley to bail them out on many different occasions, as the Seattle Kraken put up 50 shots on the night, and yet the Sharks still win this by that 3-1 score. We start off in the first period. The Sharks score the first goal of the game coming from Luke Kunin off of a tip from a Henry Thrun shot to make it 1-0, but the Seattle Kraken would very soon after respond to tie the game up at 1 with a goal from Brian Dumoulin, and that would be the only scoring in the first period. A first period that saw the Kraken just pile on the shots, and Devin Cooley had to be really, really good for the Sharks to even be in this game still by the end of 20 minutes. Ironically enough, the one goal that Cooley did let in was probably not the best one of the night, as it goes right through the 5-hole, something that you usually want to be able to cover as a goaltender. In the second period, the Kraken would continue to struggle to get any pucks past Cooley, but the Sharks would manage to capitalize 2 quick goals in quick succession on the same line even, as the first one would be scored from Kyle Burrows with an assist from William Eklund, and then the second one from Fabian Zetterlund with an assist from Mikael Granlund, who continues his ongoing point streak, as well as another assist from William Eklund, and as such, it was a 3-1 game by the end of the second period. In the third, it would be pretty much Seattle Kraken controlled. The Sharks would get very little other chances throughout the rest of this game, except primarily from their top line, and yet Cooley stands tall. The Sharks managed to hold off the Kraken, and as such, they do win this game by the score of 3-1, drawing now 1 step closer to the elusive 20-win mark of the season. Moving on to the players to talk about, we have the Lund line leading the way, and that is putting it lightly. Granlund, Zetterlund, and Eklund were really the only good line for the San Jose Sharks here tonight. If they were, let's say, a 10-on-10 performance, every other line was barely even scraping by as like a 4-on-10. That's just how much of a gap there was in terms of play between these groups of players, and this is exactly what I talked about a couple of games ago when these players were originally put together. If you are going to load up onto that top line with your literal 3 best forwards, they have to lead by example. They have to play well if you want any sort of chance of winning these games, and that's exactly what happened here tonight. Like I said, Granlund making some nice moves here, managing to create some chances when there maybe wasn't really anything there. Eklund picks up a couple of points off of 2 really nice assists. The first one catching Burrows, the trailer in that situation, a player who even the Seattle Kraken didn't really notice from a defensive standpoint. And then we saw in the Zetterlund one, this is Eklund bouncing the puck on his stick using some very nice hand-eye coordination to keep this puck alive, to keep this play alive, eventually finding Granlund, who then had a beautiful pass to Fabian Zetterlund, who's in the middle of like 3 Seattle defensemen, to be able to score this goal, and that would end up being the 3-1, the nail in the coffin, I guess you could say, for that Seattle Kraken team. So indeed, it was the top line for San Jose absolutely leading the way. They provided the majority of the offense here tonight, and it was enough, thanks to, again, their goaltending shocking performance, something I'll get to a bit later on. When it comes to the second line, we have Cunnin being joined by Graf as usual, as well as Klim Kostin. This group did manage to score the first goal of the game, so some credit does need to be given there. But besides that, a lot of the time, like with pretty much every other line here, it was spent defending quite heavily. I would like to talk a bit about Colin Graf, who has slowly managed to impress me since his debut a few games ago, but here tonight was probably the first step back for him. He didn't really have any of those nice offensive passes or offensive plays. There were just really no actual opportunities to ever get that done. Defensively, he was not particularly impressive, which was somewhat disappointing to see, and generally was one of the least effective forwards for the San Jose Sharks, just not battling hard enough, I would say, at this NHL level. You're hoping that a few games in, he'd maybe ease into it, not necessarily in terms of putting up points, but maybe looking a bit more at home in the NHL, and it doesn't feel he has quite arrived at that point just yet, and with only 3 games left on the schedule, it remains to be seen if he will really find a bit of a groove for himself, or if he'll head to the offseason with a lot to work on. When it comes to the 2 other players on this line, also nothing super impressive from them. Cunnin, as I said, did manage to score, but besides that one, there's not really much doing, and the same would absolutely be said about Kostin. When it comes to the third line, we have Bailey, Studnicka, and Bordeleau. To talk a bit about Bordeleau, kind of similar to Colin Graf, this was one of Bordelow's worst games that we have seen since probably the first game where he was called up. That first game was okay offensively, but kind of bad defensively. That could be very much said the same tonight. Offensively, it wasn't terrible for Bordeleau, but from a defensive standpoint, things did not look good, and considering the Sharks were having to defend for the majority of the night due to the fact that Seattle was really pushing it into them, you could see David Quinn kind of leaning off of this player who had been steadily increasing in ice time over the last few games. In the previous couple, Bordeleau almost managed to hit the 19-minute mark, and yet here tonight he's down all the way at 12.5 minutes in terms of ice time. So again, David Quinn very much recognizing that Bordeleau not having his best game of the year since that call-up, and ends up riding the bench more often than not. When it comes to the 2 other players on his line, Jack Studnicka, I mean, if there was any way to, he's like essentially the player equivalent of the color beige. There is nothing interesting about Studnicka as a player. There's nothing you get excited about when he actually steps onto the ice. To actually compare him to his line mate here tonight, Justin Bailey, you know, a fourth liner is not always going to be the most enigmatic player that you'll have on your roster. You're not super excited when your fourth liner steps onto the ice, even when it comes to the really, really good teams that actually have quite competent fourth lines, because you're looking for the superstars, you're looking for the playmakers, and your fourth line is very rarely ever going to feature players like that. But at least Bailey has some assets to his game that make him at least a somewhat interesting player to watch, has some decent speed, is a bigger bodied player, can maybe push some people around, but there's just nothing really there when it comes to Studnicka. Defensively, he is quite unremarkable. I won't say he's terrible, but he's certainly not very good. I mean, he has been a direct result of a couple of goals against over these last couple of games for the San Jose Sharks. Offensively, he is primarily only benefiting and getting chances when his line mates are creating them for him, as he is not generating anything for himself. I guess his face-off performances are okay, but that's not even the most exciting thing to watch in the game. He doesn't provide much on the power play. His penalty killing is, I guess, average, not terrible, but that's just generally the case for Studnicka since he's been called up over these last few games. There's nothing terrible that you can actually say about this player, but he's not someone who really gets you up and out of your seat ever at all. When it comes to then the fourth line, this was a bit of a surprise. So Sturm and McDonald joined tonight by Ryan Carpenter. I don't know if Mike Hoffman is being sidelined for some sort of injury, but he was really good, or at least quite good in the previous game. Had that great assist to Jacob McDonald, was making a couple of other solid offensive plays. He wasn't a wizard defensively, but neither was Ryan Carpenter recently at the very least. And so to see that substitution be made, it feels as though the only possible explanation is indeed that Mike Hoffman does have some sort of lingering issue there. Carpenter steps in and provides pretty much zero value for the San Jose Sharks. McDonald ends up leaving this game with some sort of injury, so Sturm ends up flexing a bit onto some other lines occasionally, but realistically the fourth line gets absolutely nothing done, which is a pretty stark departure from where they were last game when they were one of the better lines for San Jose. When it comes defensively, it was pretty much all hands on deck for the San Jose Sharks, just trying their absolute best to help out their goaltender, who was standing on his head completely here tonight, but 50 shots against is never going to reflect particularly well onto your defensemen. Ferraro and Ruda, you could say, leading the way, so to speak, and I actually thought they were perhaps the best of the worst defensive pairings here for the San Jose Sharks. They did some okay things. Ruda, I thought, was relatively solid. Ferraro wasn't too bad, making a few very key blocked shots, which is pretty much par for the course for Mario Ferraro. When it comes to the second defensive pairing, Thrun had an up and down game. Defensively, I don't think he was awful, but I don't think he was necessarily all that great. What really helped out Thrun in this game was, I thought, offensively he really brought it. Was very far and away the Sharks' best offensive defenseman on the night, which is seemingly a role that not only is he trying to grow into, but that David Quinn is attempting to get him to grow into as well. Is playing in situations of getting those offensive zone shifts, getting those power play types of shifts, and it's nice to see him actually managing to get on the scoreboard here with that primary assist on the Luke Cunnin goal with that shot towards the net, something that we have wanted to see more from him of. And then when it comes to the third defensive pairing, Vlasic and Addison, not great. I would say Addison, not the worst, but Vlasic, yes, a little bit of a shakier game. It's hard to necessarily evaluate these two players as they don't necessarily get a ton of ice time, but when they are on the ice, you're not exactly feeling super comfortable with them there. And then finally, of course, we arrive at the Sharks goaltender, Devin Cooley, fresh off just a couple of games ago, his first career NHL win coming against the St. Louis Blues, gets another game here this season, this time against the Seattle Kraken, and he is just spectacular on the night. He lets in only the singular goal, which, as I said, ironically enough, was a bit of a weak one, but when it came to the actual extremely difficult saves for him to make, he was there time and time again. It was quite interesting to watch Devin Cooley because you could definitely tell there is a bit of an inexperience there. He's a very sort of active goaltender, I guess is one way to put it. Very, a lot of movement, a lot of athleticism there. Not exactly the calmest type of goaltender that you would ever seen. You can think back to a player like Martin Jones for the San Jose Sharks a few years ago when he was really on his game in those first couple of years with the San Jose Sharks. He was like a stone pillar in net where he would barely have to move too much because his positioning was really on point. Devin Cooley is quite the opposite of that, where he seems to always be moving in whichever direction. There were also some issues when it came to some rebound controls, a couple of rather large rebounds given up, but he always managed to recover in those situations, which was really nice to see. So there are still certainly some things to work on for Devin Cooley, but there are a lot of core aspects of his game that are clearly very much there and are difficult aspects of goaltending to actually teach to a player. So we shall see if that can actually pan out to some sort of successful career for Devin Cooley. It should be pointed out that he's not, a super young goaltender. He's not incredibly raw. He's not 20 or 21 years old, but he's up at, I think, 26 years old, if I'm not mistaken. So he's technically not actually a rookie, or at least not considered a rookie by NHL standards. So I won't necessarily say he can be a goaltender for the future for the San Jose Sharks in 3 to 4 years' time, because at that point he'll already be 30 years of age. But who knows if perhaps over the next couple of years, if the Sharks want to retain his contract, retain him on the team, if he could, perhaps become something for San Jose. But that will do it for this review. The Sharks will be back in action on Saturday, where they'll be taking on the Minnesota Wild, a team that has pretty recently, I would say, fallen out of the Western Conference playoff race, so they might be slightly discouraged, and we shall see if the Sharks can maybe put up a bit of a fight in that game and not have to rely so heavily on their goaltender. Class dismissed.